At the center of every armed conflict of the 20th century, the machine gun has been a tool of conquest and of liberation. Everywhere it has unleashed consequences its creators never imagined. This is the story of one of the world's deadliest inventions. A story of technological innovation, of industrial revolution, and political power. October 1941, a Soviet tank is hit by a German shell. Its commander, 22-year-old Mikhail Kalashnikov, stumbles out of the tank and heads for the cover of a nearby forest. A piece of shrapnel lodged in his shoulder. Kalashnikov tries to make his way back to the Soviet line, but all around him, German soldiers are gunning down the fleeing Russians. They use a new kind of machine gun, a submachine gun called a Schmeiser. Small and light enough to be carried on the run.
It was a terrible scene, but what could we do? I could only grind my teeth holding my pistol in one hand. The Germans all had submachine guns, and we only had our handguns.
As he hides from the Germans, Kalashnikov swears that never again will his motherland be left undefended. He manages to crawl to safety. Later, while recovering from his wounds, he finds an encyclopedia of automatic weapons in the hospital library. He stays up all night, devouring every page.
I became obsessed. I had school-type block notes, pens, pencils, and erasers. I began to work on the drafts of the first submachine gun I wanted to create. I didn't have a lot of knowledge or experience.
Then, in 1945, Fat Man and Little Boy are detonated over the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Kalashnikov throws down the assault rifle he is trying to design.
The atomic bomb. Of course, I thought it would mean the end of our little shooting games. With such global weapons, I thought it would mean global war.
But Kalashnikov's superiors tell him to keep working. In the coming Cold War, it will be his machine gun that will do much of the killing. In 1945, the world looks forward to a time of peace and plenty. Nowhere is this more true than in the United States.
If we can put this tremendous machine of ours, which has made this victory possible, to work for peace, we can look forward to the greatest age in the history of mankind.
We had pent-up consumer demand, money saved during the war that we could not spend on consumer goods, but was now available, an outpouring of goods like television, suburban tract homes. That notion that the world was now safe for America, that American technology, American values would triumph almost automatically around the world. It truly looked like the American century.
But the optimism and hope for a better world has spread far beyond America and Europe.
With World War II, you had regular soldiers coming back and saying if they could in fact fight in World War II to end fascism, to end racism as expressed by the Nazis, why should they put up with that in their own countries?
When the whole thing was over, and they said, well, here we are. Now it's gin and tonic on the terrace at Shepherd's Hotel or whatever. And the local people said, no thanks, you got that bit wrong, it's goodbye now, and we're going to take care of ourselves. And for a bit we tried to say, no, we're putting the clock back.
All who carry the mark of the Mau Mau must be hunted out so that peace may come to this troubled colony.
colonial peoples rise in revolt. Jomo Kenyatta begins a fight for self-government in British-controlled Kenya. Ahmed Ben Bella leads a rebellion against the French in Algeria. Ahmed Sukarno tries to liberate Indonesia from the Dutch. The insurgents pick up abandoned weapons from World War II. In army depots and jungles and in hidden caches, anti-colonial forces grab Tommy guns, Sten guns, grease guns, and Bren guns. Their tactics are those used by the partisans of World War II, and the machine gun is critical to their success. Small groups or even lone fighters can attack and quickly disappear into jungle cover or city streets. The machine gun has given new life to guerrilla tactics. Against the weakened empires of Europe, the nationalists often win.
So that from the U.S. point of view, greater national independence was more generally seen as opening up economic opportunities. The fact that these economies would not be under the control of European power was seen as a plus.
In 1947, the British leave Burma and India. And in 1949, the Dutch abandon Indonesia.
Whether they would develop into Marxist economies was something else, and that obviously was not anything that we would have welcomed.
The United States wanted these economies opened up to U.S. domination to prevent independent economic development, which they thought would be what was sometimes called a virus that might infect others, meaning other people might be interested in it and it would inspire similar developments elsewhere. So you have to prevent the rot from spreading.
In 1949, the forces of Mao Zedong overthrow the still largely feudal order of China.
In China, the chips were down as the communist armies marched into Shanghai, and to complete control, Russia had gained a mighty friend.
The revolution removes almost 500 million people from America's economic plans.
The dominant event of the post-World War II era economically was the collapse of free China and the loss of that enormous market that Americans and Europeans had hoped to be able to exploit.
The U.S. makes it clear that it will permit no further losses. It supplies arms to royalists fighting revolutionaries in Greece, restores the Shah to his throne, overthrowing a democratic government in Iran. And when the North Koreans are poised to take over the South, the U.S. commits its own troops to battle, successfully taking on the Chinese. So when nationalist leader Ho Chi Minh throws the French out of Vietnam in 1954, he faces a superpower far stronger than the old empires of Europe. Leftover guns from the Second World War will not be enough. The Vietnamese are in desperate need of new machine guns. They will come from the factory of Mikhail Kalashnikov. Izhevsk, Russia. Kalashnikov has perfected his new gun. Its official name is the Automat Kalashnikov Model 1947, but it is soon known everywhere by its abbreviation, AK-47.
It looked as if it was ready to jump into your hands from the very beginning. I decided that not only women have to be beautiful, but weapons have to be beautiful too.
The AK assault rifle combines some of the range and power of a rifle with the portability of a machine pistol.
One of the important features of the AK-47 is how extremely simple a mechanism it is and how you can teach untrained soldiers or peasant soldiers how to strip and maintain this rifle. It's now field stripped.
I was visiting the frontier guards. I showed them how they can put a handful of sand inside the gun and it will still work. They looked at me surprised, saying a machine gun has to be clean and well maintained. I was just showing them how reliable it was. With other guns, if the wind is blowing, it will blow dust inside. That's it. They don't work. My gun is very reliable.
They're typically Soviet. They're not real accurate, but they work well. And a soldier can be pretty effective with one without a lot of training. And it is the great proletarian weapon.
By the 1960s, the first crates of AK-47s land in eastern Laos. They're headed for Vietnam. Nine years after throwing the French out of Vietnam, Ho Chi Minh steps up his campaign against the American-backed government in the South. Late one night, Viet Cong fighters enter the small village of My Lai.
The very first time that I heard the AK-47, I think that is when Viet Cong killed my teacher. They know that he working for Americans, for the CIA. That is why the Viet Cong killed him.
At age 12, Layli Hayslip joins the Viet Cong.
We call him Uncle Liberation. To Vietnamese, Viet Cong is our brothers, our father, our uncle. You have to fight back somehow, and the only thing we can find is to help the Viet Cong so that they can fight.
Layli keeps the local cadres informed of troop movements, steals weapons for them when she can, and hides their precious AK-47s. One day, Layli is working in the field outside her village.
It come from nowhere. It just land there. It's just like an angel. We're scared of him. He looked tall and mean, very powerful in his uniform. He just stepped out from his helicopter and surveyed the land. And the children all around him, but he just paid no attention to us, and he just get back in his machine and flew back to heaven. But then he came back not just 10 or 20, but 100 of this machine. And now they have machine gun.
U.S. troops have arrived in Vietnam. They will soon number almost 500,000. One of them is a teenage volunteer from Fort Carson, Colorado.
I wasn't trying to be a hero to go. I just thought it was the right thing to do because my friends were going too. And for a 19 or 20-year-old, it looked like it might be a fun year to go and see what this was all about.
A Huey assault helicopter has 2 M60 machine guns and is manned only by volunteers. Wilkie takes the job and becomes a door gunner. Strapped in, legs dangling in the open sky, he attaches his M60 to a bungee cord and fires.
We were looking for human targets. If you didn't see that, you fired at what you thought would be a probable place for the enemy to be. You know, I had managed to put probably 30 or 40 bullets into an area with 2 people very close together, and they had nowhere to go, and all they could do was just take the bullets. They couldn't run, they couldn't duck, they couldn't hide. They were clearly in a bad place at the wrong time, and it cost them both their lives.
Panic is coming. It's not just quiet. It's just like a tornado that goes right through your village.
Door gunners are so hated, the Viet Cong have put a price on their heads.
You know how many villages he went through a day, and you know how many women and children and men can kill a day with one gunman. So yeah, if we can kill him, that will save a lot of us. We feel he's just a machine gun. He's not a human. He becomes the gun himself. His conscience is not there. It's just like he has no heart.
We had adopted a mountain yard village probably 3 miles or 3 kilometers from our base, and we would go out there as volunteers, and we built a schoolhouse. We'd wash all the Vietnamese babies, and we would drink their rice wine with them. And it turned out that during the Tet Offensive, that was where most of our rocket attacks were coming from. You know, so we ended up leveling that village one night. We ended up destroying everything we built that year.
Areas suspected of supporting the Viet Cong are designated free kill zones. Anything that moves can be gunned down.
The bullet that makes the biggest hole will do the most damage. They'll tumble inside the body. Then when the yaw is at its maximum, it will magnify the size of the wound tract and make it the length of the bullet. It'll break the most bones, dice and cut through the most tissue, cut the most blood vessels, and reach into the vital organs and structures of the body.
And the bigger the hole, the deadlier it is.
If you killed an enemy, what have you done? Well, you've got one dead enemy, okay? That's what you want to do. But if you wound an enemy, what have you done? You've taken him out of the action, and 2 of his friends who have to pick him up and carry him off. So there's great value in wounding the enemy.
But in close engagements with the Americans, it is often the Vietnamese who win. The Viet Cong are experts at striking suddenly and then quickly disappearing into the jungle. The United States tries to counter the simple AK with the M16, a high-tech assault rifle built by American designer Eugene Stoner. But the Army has equipped his rifle with a more highly powered cartridge than Stoner intended. As a result, the mechanism fouls, and many young GIs die clutching a jammed M16. As more and more body bags are shipped home to an increasingly alarmed USA, the military tries to find a way to increase firepower and reduce the need for ground troops. They find the weapon they need in a gun that is over 100 years old. Before the war, a retired Army colonel had found an antique 1883 model Gatling gun and attached an electric motor to the hand crank.
The developers of this new weapon call it the Rapid Fire Minigun. Watch this.
The gun that helped build the empires of the 19th century is now mounted on aircraft. The planes circle villages, tilting their wings down to the left, and open fire with their 3 side-mounted Gatlings, each firing up to 5,800 rounds per minute, 5 times faster than the fastest single-barrel machine guns.
When you shoot one of those things, it's just like somebody ripping canvas, but real loud. You know, it's just this tearing sound because it all goes off together. You just get this huge flame coming out next to you.
After a Gatling attack, soldiers sometimes find the victim's blood literally boiling in their bodies.
Here, there's no need for a return mission.
The scorched earth policy defoliates the forests and depopulates the countryside. Survivors are rounded up and taken to camps near Saigon. Among them is Laylee Hayslip.
I learned to speak English. I see American as another human being. When he took off his uniform, he put down his gun. I get used to it. When they offer me $400 to sleep with 2 Americans, that $400, I can buy a house for my mother. I buy a lot of food for my mother, my father, and my son. But my heart is still with the Viet Cong in the village.
In the end, despite the Americans' domination of the air, their high-tech weapons cannot prevail against the millions of Vietnamese who have no choice but to win. The Americans go home. In 1975, South Vietnam collapses and Saigon is renamed Ho Chi Minh City. About 2 million Vietnamese, soldiers and civilians, have lost their lives. Mikhail Kalashnikov's AK-47 has helped win a victory for one of the poorest peoples on Earth. In the years following Vietnam, a wave of liberation movements will come to power, often down the barrel of an AK-47. But after the nightmare of Vietnam, the United States looks for a new way to fight the Cold War. In the 1970s, still reeling from its defeat in Vietnam, the U.S. is in economic crisis, its long post-war boom slowing into recession. But all over the world, revolution spreads. The martyred Che Guevara's slogan of 1,000 Vietnams is taken up by left-wing rebels from El Salvador to the Philippines. And Mikhail Kalashnikov's AK-47 becomes a symbol of Third World liberation.
In villages and countries, there are many little boys named Kalash. They are the firstborn sons of soldiers who returned to their everyday lives after the war, and named their sons after my gun. Isn't it a great compliment for a gun designer? See how many grandchildren I have.
Encouraged by the apparent weakness of the U.S., the Soviet Union increases its shipments of AKs around the globe.
They showed us a huge map and announced that the coverage of the world by AKs is soon to be completed.
The United States can't afford another Vietnam. But it also can't afford to lose any more resources and markets to Third World revolutions. So it fights by proxy, pouring military assistance and weapons into the Third World.
We had proxies, that is the United States and the West, and the Russians had their proxies. In some cases it would be a government fighting an insurrection, and the government was pro-Western government, and in other cases it would be a leftist government, and we would be supplying the insurrection.
God bless them for being Contras, and so it makes me a Contra too.
Managing these insurrections became a major part of the covert business of the Cold War.
By 1988, the U.S. has intervened in over 100 countries in the Third World. For a while, the USSR keeps pace, and in the 10 years after the Vietnam War, 40 million machine guns, submachine guns, and assault rifles flood the world.
You had a proliferation of arms from the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union. These were the hot wars of the Cold War period.
The hot war that floods the world with more machine guns than ever before begins one night in December 1979 when the Soviet Union makes a fatal decision. Afghanistan's hardline president has provoked an Islamic rebellion. The Politburo sends an invasion force to replace him with a more moderate leader, but their invasion inflames the rebellion they sought to contain. The Soviet army faces bands of fighters who call themselves the Mujahideen, a Persian word that means warrior. And they are determined to evict the Soviets. Tahir Khan commands the Mujahideen's southeastern province.
People are very religious, they don't want any foreigners to come there, People was always thinking that we go there and fight and get back our land, The people are fighters. They like fighting.
the U.S. sees a chance to inflict some harm on the Soviet Union in its own backyard. So it launches the greatest covert operation of the Cold War. Tahir Khan receives an invitation.
Like, I came many times to Washington, and I don't know to whom I was talking, but I was talking with different people, you know. And we will tell them that what is our need, you know, and what do we need for the fighting.
The U.S. will provide money, intelligence, training, and to conceal their involvement, Russia's own AK. But to get the AKs into Afghanistan, the Americans must first come here, to the Principality of Monaco. Monaco was once home to the merchant of death, turn-of-the-century arms trader Sir Basil Zaharoff. It is still the playground of arms dealers, like Saudi Adnan Khashoggi, who moors his yacht in the harbor below the casino Zaharoff once owned. It is to men like Khashoggi that the U.S. turns to get weapons to Afghanistan. The guns made at Kalashnikov's factory are shipped to Alexandria as part of a Soviet aid package to Egypt. But eager for hard currency, the Egyptian government sells the AKs for cash to an arms dealer who knows the CIA wants them.
The arms dealer is not the villain of the piece. The arms dealer is a guy whose entire life is in the hands of the intelligence services on all sides that are using him. And if he gets into a bind, or he does the wrong thing, or if he becomes an embarrassment to anybody, he's totally expendable and he can count on either being killed or going to jail.
The arms dealer arranges for the guns to be shipped to Antwerp, a port known for its lax controls. There they get labeled oil drilling equipment. The crates are now sold to Pakistan, an ally of the United States.
The Pakistani government will say to drug traffickers, look, we'll let you get to the border if in addition to the 50 kilos of heroin you're carrying, you'll carry 5, 6, 10 AK-47s.
The long and complex route gives the U.S. what it needs: deniability.
We will also tell people that we capture all these weapons, and if the journalists are coming and whoever coming, that we are not getting support from anybody.
The guns are carried on the backs of mules into Afghanistan, where they are smuggled to the Mujahideen by gun runners like Tahir's young sisters.
If somebody is suspicious that they're going to arrest us, then we had to use it. So they made us shoot guns and machine guns, even bigger than our body. It was heavier than myself. And the first shot that I shot, it threw me back because I wasn't holding the gun too tight to my body. And my shoulder was sore for a month, but I wasn't showing it to my parents because they would have got mad.
By 1989, the U.S. has spent $3 billion on the Afghan resistance. And in the hands of the Mujahideen, the AK once again challenges a superpower.
The plane came and started dropping bomb, you know. We used to line up people, you know, like 10 people, 15 people, whatever we get, and they will just lay on the ground on their back, and they will start firing one magazine of Kalashnikov. The plane came and it was hit, and it got it blown up, you know. Whoever came to Afghanistan, they were hurted, and they were forced to leave, not willingly to leave. You know?
Unable to defeat the Mujahideen, in 1989 the Soviet army finally pulls out of Afghanistan, which a few years later falls to a fundamentalist Islamic movement. Like the US after Vietnam, the Soviet Union has been hurt by its war. But for the Soviets, the wounds turn out to be fatal. In 1991, bankrupted by the war and the arms race, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics collapses. The gun Mikhail Kalashnikov created to defend his country has helped to destroy it. With the Cold War over, the northern nations withdraw from their old battlegrounds. But millions of automatic weapons have been left behind. In the poorer nations, the AK is everywhere.
Which our nations seek to build a new world of freedom and democracy.
A new world order can emerge.
And partners in a new world order.
We want to be the healers.
A new world order.
Thank you all very much.
The Cold War is over, but America's 45-year conflict with the Soviet Union has left over 100 million machine guns in the world's poorer nations.
One of the countries that is the real byproduct of the Cold War disaster is Pakistan. And it was our conduit during the Afghan War. Provided weapons to the Afghans, was a staging ground, and in fact the Pakistanis managed the Afghan war for the United States.
The guns left in Pakistan after the Cold War can be found today in the shops which line the only street in the town of Dara. Here, an AK knockoff can be bought for as little as $90. Towns like Dara are international arms bazaars, catering to wars from Bosnia to Africa.
They're readily available, they're available very inexpensively. In many parts of the world, people would rather have an automatic weapon than a shirt on their back.
(1991) Somalia. First a client of the Soviet Union and then the United States, Somalia has been heavily armed by both. But now Somalia's government, a colonial creation overtaken by the Cold War, is too corrupt and weak to survive. When famine hits, political conflict turns into competition over food and drags the entire country into civil war.
We get warlords as states begin to fragment. And we get warlords because they provide an answer to the question that's absolutely essential when state power fragments, which is who will protect me now? Warlords emerge to provide a service.
The Somali government collapses as warlords take over Mogadishu. Each defends his city block with machine gun-rigged trucks called technicals.
So what they did is to loot the armories first thing, and everybody could carry 3 or 4 machine guns.
In 1992, George Bush, flush with his victory in the Persian Gulf and about to leave office, now decides that the violence in Somalia must end. It will be the first test case of his new world order. A US-led UN peacekeeping force, Operation Restore Hope, tries to take over the capital, Mogadishu. As the American peacekeepers chase down the warlords, they confront armies, often made up of 12 and 14-year-old children, who use an assault rifle as well as any adult.
They obey orders without reservation. Like adults, they never ask questions. They kill, no questions asked. 2, they are cost effective. Just give them drug and food, nothing else.
A child probably won't be so cool and probably won't be so accurate in his fire. But if you've got a complete high school firing Kalashnikovs, it makes a very disagreeable storm of fire we saw in Somalia.
When American helicopters attack a meeting and kill over 20 clan elders, 4 American soldiers are killed in retaliation and are dragged through the streets. The UN withdraws from Somalia. A decade later, Somalia still has no national government. Warlords do daily battle over guns, food, and a Kenyan drug called cat. And everybody is armed. The New World Order has died a quick death on the beaches of Mogadishu.
What keeps the fighting going is that these places are rich. You can't sustain the updraft that keeps the fires of war going unless there's diamonds, unless there's oil, unless there's gold, unless there's rubber, unless there's teak, unless there's, God knows, some primary commodity that the rest of the West wants and will pay for.
In Sierra Leone, it is diamonds. But with the West only acting when its interests are threatened directly, third world governments must now find their own world order.
Hi, I'm Gavin, and I work for Executive Outcomes, and I've been working with them for a long time now. It's just a beautiful place.
Executive Outcomes is a company staffed mainly by former South African military operatives. They prefer the term military consultants to mercenaries.
Give me the desire to obey your laws rather than to get rich.
For a large fee and diamond mining concessions, Executive Outcomes puts down a rebellion in the diamond-rich Kono province in 12 short weeks. Sierra Leone then gives diamond concessions to a company, which is quickly bought by the Canadian corporation Diamond Works. Many of Executive Outcomes members have owned shares in Diamond Works. So when the Sierra Leone government cannot afford Executive Outcomes services anymore, the mercenaries stand guard over the Diamond Works mines while the rest of the country descends into chaos once again.
The money comes from people who want mineral concessions, who are from the developed world, and the weapons, in the case of Sierra Leone, among other things, came from a British manufacturer who was all too happy to sell them into the chaos.
Who opened firing?
AFL.
Why?
We don't know.
We have to figure out how to stop having nice small wars as a commercial activity.
Another war with enormous profits is the one in the streets of some of the world's most advanced cities. Los Angeles, the economic epicenter for the Pacific Rim. A 461 square mile sprawl, it is the supreme first world metropolis. But parts of LA are more like Beirut or Moscow than a capital city of the late 20th century. And in LA, it's only a few minutes' drive between the two.
When I saw it, Thompson 45, it was lust. After that, the homeboys from my neighborhood started calling me Machine Gun Mundo. We would go for a torso shot first. That was the knockdown power we needed to then walk up and finish them off. Barrio Nuevo, the gang I originated from, been around since the 40s. There are members from those times whose kids and grandkids pass the torch to other family members.
Local Mexicans lose LA at the turn of the century when Yankee real estate promoters sell off the land to affluent Midwesterners. Native and later immigrant Mexicans are pushed into the barrios, which become South Central and East LA. In the 40s, they are joined by black migrants looking for work in the wartime economy.
These are people who are driven off the southern farms with the mechanization of agriculture and settled in the cities like other immigrants. The big difference is that this was no longer an expanding economy by the 60s.
With unemployment in South Central LA at 20%, the black version of the California dream is collapsing. In 1965, the residents of Watts erupt in militant protest. Inner city youth rally behind movements like the Black Panthers and men like Malcolm X. But when the Los Angeles Police Department cracks down and destroys the local Panther chapters, LA's youth turn to the gangs, which filled the void.
And they lived under horrible conditions, and they picked up the ways of moving forward that you could, a lot of which was crime.
Today, there are over 70,000 gang members in LA, their ranks expanded by corporate layoffs and the economic downturn of the 80s. Most have found employment in the burgeoning crack cocaine economy. And like the Chicago mobsters before them, the machine gun is one of the tools of their trade.
We see a lot of automatics, 9 millimeters, 45 caliber autos. We're seeing a lot of Uzi machine guns.
The machine pistols and assault rifles, Uzis and MAC-10s, are the ideal street guns for the gangs. In South Central, kids call machine pistols summer guns. Stuck into jeans, a MAC-10 doesn't need to be covered by a jacket to be hidden.
What's alarming is that these guns are being sold over the counter, most of the time from illegal money. That is money that is being made by the sale of cocaine. And it's big business out here.
Anybody that had machine guns, semi-automatic weapons, I had the drug dealer call me, and then I'd negotiate over the phone, depending on how many they wanted to give us.
U.S. lawmakers put up with machine guns, bowing to the pressure of gun lobbies who regard any regulation of the ability to buy an AK an intolerable constraint on freedom.
When you have large urban societies and you've created, civilization, you're going to have weapons, and people do need to defend themselves. Could you imagine, going to Rome and taking away everybody's sword? I don't think so.
That kind of weaponry in the hands of criminals, in the hands of kids who really don't know the firepower they have, is something that no civilized society should really tolerate. The availability of those machine pistols really encouraged the militarization of police departments. So one of the consequences in the United States has been the development of the SWAT teams, policemen who in effect are in full military gear, heading in to do things like serve a warrant.
The Special Weapons and Tactics Team's favorite weapons system is the Heckler & Koch MP5 submachine gun.
The MP5 is much more appropriate for single aim shots or 2-round bursts. The 9mm cartridge is not an extremely powerful cartridge, and that's why for police use, they should be accurate and that bullets don't go flying over, because if it hits Mrs. Smith across the street, then there's going to be multi-million-dollar lawsuits.
Once police get the idea that the guy on the other side is the enemy, the notion that the guy is innocent until proven guilty is finished.
Obviously a very, very dangerous individual.
And this really undermines notions of policing in a civil society.
Los Angeles has grown used to its deadly combination of machine guns and poverty, as have other cities, like Johannesburg and Moscow. But in the next century, the world will learn to live with newer and even deadlier machine guns. Over a century ago, Richard Jordan Gatling made the world's first machine gun. He hoped it would alleviate the suffering of war. Instead, it became a tool of imperial conquest. With the machine gun, the European empires took the world, only to turn the machine gun on each other in the massacre of the Great War. Small and easy to use, the machine gun spread into cities and jungles, traveling across the globe to confront its inventors. "140 years after Gatling's first gun, Mike O'Dwyer, a retail manager from Canberra, Australia, submitted a patent in downtown Sydney. It was for a new machine gun.
I had concern that if I did nothing with it, that I'd end up being a cranky old fellow sitting on a patio somewhere saying, I should have done something about it.
The fastest machine gun in the world shoots 4,000 rounds per minute. Mike O'Dwyer's new gun shoots 1 million. He calls it Metal Storm. In one version of the gun, it has 36 barrels, each holding 15 bullets. The gun has no moving parts, but is fired electronically. As the charge fires, O'Dwyer's revolutionary new bullet expands, blocking the barrel to stop a chain reaction. The distance between each bullet leaving a normal machine gun is about 100 feet. The distance between Metal Storm's bullets is 4 inches. Mike O'Dwyer's gun will stop missiles and tanks as easily as it stops approaching soldiers. Like Richard Jordan Gatling, Mike O'Dwyer says that his gun will save more lives than it takes, and that if he does not build it, somebody else will.
Any technology that delivers an advantage does so only for a period of time. The advance of technology really can't stop, because if it does, then the advantage can pass from us to people that might threaten us. So there's no doubt in my mind that I'm delivering a technology to the world that gives our government and my country a better ability to defend itself.
Metal Storm will soon be available in handheld versions. Both the pistol and the machine gun models will require little more power than the battery from a digital calculator. And Mike O'Dwyer plans to tap into the $500 million private firearms market in the US. Like every other machine gun, history will probably have other plans for Mike O'Dwyer's Metal Storm. For 130 years, the machine gun has been embraced by a world devoted to the pursuit of wealth and power, with no regard for human cost. As long as that pursuit is allowed to happen, the carnage of the last century will continue into the next, often down the barrel of a machine gun.